series of 30-minute webinars about physician leadership. You can register for the upcoming webinar in the series through the link associated with it on the slide. And the first 3 presentations that have occurred already can be accessed in their entirety on our website. This particular presentation should be available by Monday for streaming and mobile use. Joining me for today's webinar is Neal Barker. Neal is a partner with Healthcare Strategy Group and has been with the group a long time. And it's really a pleasure to be able to work with him on this presentation. Thanks a lot, Neal, for joining us, and we look forward to your involvement.
Thank you, Terry.
Before we begin, we should address a couple of items that we address each time. If you haven't already done so, you can download handouts for today's presentation via the link emailed to you in the registration reminder. The presentation is available there as a PDF file on the welcome page. We truly welcome your questions because that's what will allow you to achieve maximum value from the program. You can submit questions at any time during the program by using the question submission option on the right panel of your screen. We will try to answer submitted questions at the end of the presentation, and we won't identify the names or organizations with which you're affiliated when we address the questions. If you submit a question and we can't get to it during the program, we'll be sure to answer it promptly via email. And as always, you can contact either of us through our contact information on the screen, and we'll be glad to discuss this or any other topic that you might need assistance with. Having addressed those, let's go ahead and start today's program. Among the objectives, again, we're going to explore a couple of case studies that highlight the value of integrating physician leadership in a healthcare organization and try to demonstrate how involvement of physician leaders within the organizational structure improves improvement efforts, improves outcomes. And this is not just periodic, but just in the routine practice operations on a daily basis. As we go to the next, we've talked a number of times, we'll need to review some of the tools we'll be using in the case studies, and we've talked a number of times about our 8 key elements of a high-performing organization. And the elements are listed there on the screen with a comprehensive look at all of them. And although physician leadership is again listed in its own category, it impacts every one of these areas, and involving physician leadership is crucial to each of these areas achieving their ultimate best outcome. And Neal, with that, I was wondering if you can talk about a tool we haven't used in our leadership series, but that has been out in our literature and in other presentations.
Sure. So thank you, Terry. So the next slide here, slide 6, is our physician network life cycle. We believe, like any product, any company, and any industry, there's a life cycle associated with that company, with that product. There's the initial rollout of the product. There's a growth phase. There's, as what we call here, operational chaos. And then there's a period where the organization or the product matures and perhaps reaches a point of decline. But what we've highlighted here graphically is what we believe to be the life cycle, the normal life cycle of a physician, an employed physician network, starting with a novice phase, growth phase, a phase in operational chaos, and then focusing strategically, which we'll call the strategic phase, and then a phase where an organization is getting true value and focused on value with the employed network. Finally, a mature phase. The next slide is probably easier to read in printout version. You know, there's a lot of text here, but basically what this provides is kind of a description of each of those phases, from the novice phase to the mature phase. You know, and our focus today is physician leadership and governance, and so we'll kind of focus a little bit there on what it means, what physician leadership or governance looks like at each one of these stages in a physician network life cycle. So you'll see at the novice phase, there's no substantial involvement by the physicians in leadership or governance, all the way to the mature phase where physician leadership is truly integrated at all levels of the group, and there's an executive team in place that's working with the physician leaders to help direct and guide the physician network going forward. And I will say that particularly on the left side of the page, the novice phase through the operational chaos phase, you know, there's no real clear demarcation or delineation. There's a lot of characteristics. You know, before you get to strategic focus, you know, you may have a characteristic in one area that's novice. You know, maybe you're a novice in strategy, but maybe in culture you're in growth mode. So you may have kind of an amalgamation of all these characteristics at various levels within your organization until you get to that strategic focus and really start you know, using the physician network in the way that hopefully you intended when you started to employ physicians. So we'll come back to both of these slides as we go on and look at the two case studies. But you know, we find this to be very, very helpful and very descriptive of you know, organizations that we work with. So Terry, next I guess I'll turn it back over to you and have you start talking about our first case study.
Thanks, Neal. So as we look at this first case, this is a practice in the Northeast. It has 27 providers and 11 practices involving 8 different specialties spread over 4 geographic locations, meaning 4 separate areas in which the practices are located. 4 of those 11 practices joined the group in the previous 3 years, so a little bit of a recent rapid growth phase. The CEO became concerned about proceeding with planned acquisition of additional practices because the operating losses associated with the current practices continued to escalate and didn't seem to be coming under control. That group was looking at incorporating 3 new practices, and incorporating them were being jeopardized by the current performance of the group. So can we go? Thanks. This, you know, jeopardizing a strategic plan to acquire practices obviously placed heightened attention on the current practice performance. And if we looked at, you know, how they were being administered, there was a director of physician practices who had a part-time assistant, and that was pretty much it for the whole network. The group approached and requested assistance with practice assessments and assistance with developing potential strategies for how to proceed and get a handle on their current status. So if we go to the next slide and we look at the life cycle, we actually would place this network in that operational chaos phase. Some might argue it's in a growth phase, since there were several practices that just joined the group recently, and they're looking at several more in the near future. But if we go to the next slide, where we break down the you know, what it means in the different areas, and again, as with any matrix, it's not like you go straight down operational chaos and each one will exactly apply to the current status. it's kind of a conglomerate of all the different ones, and where the predominant areas of focus would come out. And so, you know, if we're debating growth mode and operational chaos, for instance, I mean, if we look at the descriptor for operational chaos, there's growth with little group integration, inadequate infrastructure to manage the group, and unsustainable losses, which seems to describe this group pretty accurately. And as we go down the 8 key elements, we'll find areas that really need assistance, or areas of focus that should grab our attention. But as we look at the next slide, at what really kind of leaps out at us was the director's span of control. Here we have multiple practices in multiple specialties and multiple practice sites, with only a director and a part-time assistant there to manage. That director has both operational and strategic responsibilities, and if you looked at their structure, there was no visible physician leadership. So I guess if we looked at that physician leadership row, we'd be way on the left for that one. But again, you know, it kind of focuses us on that whole issue of management infrastructure. So as we see on the next slide, you know, going back to that 8 key elements, when we described infrastructure in the past, infrastructure looks at the organization's operational leadership as well as other elements that are necessary to support the practice. And as we've discussed in the past, a management team that's spread too thin cannot achieve the results that are desired. And if physician leadership is not included in the management structure, it's very difficult to move the group forward. And so this practice network really seemed to you know, have a huge issue with the management infrastructure and being able to move the group forward. So what are some potential solutions? As we move forward in the slides here, looking at the current management structure, you have the director of physician practices, an assistant, not much between them and the 8 current practices, and then out in the periphery you have 3 prospective practices looking to join. So they have to be considered also, because there's a ton of work that goes along in that whole acquisition and merger structure situation. As we look at that, we say, well, what could the management structure look like if we really tried to maximize things and give that poor director of physician practices some help? So one element is the insertion of an operations manager to focus on day-to-day functioning and operational activities that allows the director of physician practices to kind of move up a notch, look more strategically, start working on those prospective practices, looking on long-term strategic planning and other strategic imperatives, while the operation manager manages day-to-day functions. The other is inserting, and back to the focus of our webinar, which is physician leadership, but focusing on 3 primary areas of physician leadership in the structure that seem to be non-existent. One is a consideration of a medical director, working in a dyad relationship with the director of physician practices, leading the network, and the 2 of them working with a physician advisory council to involve the physicians across the board and moving the group forward. And then you notice toward the bottom of the slide, formally designating a dyad leadership in each practice, so that each practice has a dyad structure, working on each of the individual practices, and then working in concert with the network dyad structure above it. So with that, the proposal back to the group as we move on to look at potential solutions, the group decided that creating a physician advisory council would be very beneficial. It would immediately infuse physician leadership support while they were contemplating the addition or designation of a part-time medical director. The group, the network felt that even if they didn't get to designating a part-time medical director right away, at least we'd been involving the physicians in a direct leadership role and getting greater input, greater buy-in, and greater outcomes as a result. To do that, they requested assistance with creating the council, educating and mentoring the member physicians in the council, and working on getting the council going in its whole group dynamic process so it can be an effective vehicle for change. The other thing that the network requested was working in the practices and creating that dyad leadership structure in each practice. They designated a formal physician leader with a practice manager, and they requested assistance with developing them as individuals and developing them as a team and working within the practices to get the group together, each of the individual practices together, work on metrics and work on solutions to moving the practice forward in a more efficient manner. Additional solutions included the recruitment or the recommended recruitment of an operations manager. You know, we talked about that in the potential management infrastructure, and in the interim, we were able to provide interim support during the recruitment process and determine some performance metrics and reporting dashboards that we shared both with the advisory council and also the individual practices, and worked with the leadership in both of those areas to not only just receive reports, but develop action plans based on the reports and follow progress in a performance improvement methodology. One of the other things that we won't talk a whole lot about was whether we can actually consolidate some of the practices and become more efficient in the total operations. In looking at the outcomes that we're receiving early on with these, very quickly the physicians became palpably engaged. They had a renewed interest in the practice and the direction that things were going. The practices started to focus on positive change and not just getting through each day and each day's business and routine. The director was able to concentrate on some of the strategic initiatives that he hadn't had the opportunity to focus on when he was just, you know, inundated with day-to-day operational issues. And they were able to focus on the practice acquisitions that they were anticipating, but he was also able to finally address a lot of the issues that the recently acquired practices had been having difficulties with in their transition into the group. Almost immediately, the employed group became more attractive to the prospective practices. They really liked what they were hearing from the other docs about the changes that were being made, and any of the reluctances that they had about joining the group started to dissipate rapidly as they, you know, heard about the positive changes that were occurring. A similar thing happened with the operation manager applicants. There were a number of applicants, and as we started the initial phase of screening, we were able to answer questions about where the group is going, how, you know, what the management philosophy was, how involved the physicians were in the leadership process, and some very highly qualified operations managers became much more interested in the position when they heard the things that were underway. So we don't have the long-term results yet, meaning that, you know, have we had an impact on the practice losses and that type of thing. You know, our initial work and quality, did we change outcomes in clinical processes and outcomes and all? But at least the early results were all positive and predictably positive about the direction that the practice is going, because we've involved the physicians in the leadership process. We developed a more robust management infrastructure, which, by the way, many groups are reluctant to do because it's, you know, they just look at that as extra overhead expense, but it's money well spent, because now the group can function at a much higher level, and it's a great return on investment when done well. So again, early results looking favorable, focused on management infrastructure and looking at that area where they were on the life cycle, and you know, relatively easily determining where some of the areas of focus needed to be. So that's pretty much it for case study one. Neal, do you want to start up on the second case study?
Sure. Thank you, Terry. So our next case study is really a developing case study as well. The background is it's a good-sized hospital system in the southeast. At this point, their employed network is limited in terms of primary care base. There's a history with the hospital that there was a bad taste in their mouth related to physician employment, and really the market hasn't dictated until recently that they needed to employ physicians. Most of the employed physicians that are there now, their employment was driven by a hospital need, whether it be for call coverage or for hospitalists or ED physicians or other hospital needs and areas. So there's a very, very limited primary care base currently. The situation is that we're in the early stages. Healthcare Strategy Group is in the early stages of a management contract where we're managing the employed physician network. So we're coming in and looking at a group that historically there is no group, has not been any group culture. There were basically all employed for needs at the hospital, so they kind of operate independently. So there's no brand identity, very limited physician engagement, inconsistencies in compensation, inconsistencies in operations, and limited, if no focus at this point, on value-based incentives, mostly base salaries and production incentives and so on. So going on, positioning this client, we would probably position them on the growth, in the growth mode. There's a lot of as you go through the 8 key elements, there's a lot of characteristics that might be in the novice area, the novice phase. There might be some characteristics in operational chaos, but by and large, we felt that growth mode was an appropriate position. They are growing the network mostly right now in the primary care base, so the growth mode would be the best descriptor. Going on, as we see, we've highlighted that here, and again, there's going to be some characteristics that are not right there within that the growth mode, but by and large, that would be the descriptor. At this point, we're investing heavily in the infrastructure and engaging the physicians, trying to cultivate a culture of physician leadership. We've developed and put in place the Physician Advisory or Physician Governance Council that is meeting regularly to talk about issues, very early stages, so kind of getting to know what their role is. We're using them and they're helping us to develop a strategic plan for the group that will support the organization's overall strategic plan. So we're investing first in physician leadership and infrastructure as kind of 1 and 1A as the places that we're starting, and then we'll pull in the other 8 key areas as we get the infrastructure and the physician leadership pulled together. We'll start working on and are working on the other areas of the 8 key elements. With the strategy that we're working on now, that obviously is number 2 on the list of targets of the 8 key elements that we're working on, is developing that strategy. So over time, we'll start to pull with the physician leadership and the investments in infrastructure. We'll start to pull on these other areas and pull them across the life cycle, hopefully over time, working through the operational chaos, the strategic focus, and then at some point in time down the road, developing a value network and a mature network. Next slide. Again, revisiting the 8 key elements. This slide we talk about, that our focus is comprehensive. We don't just focus on one area and hope that that's going to be enough. It takes all areas to reach and to build a high-performing physician network. So we're not singular in our focus. We're comprehensive. As I mentioned, we're starting with the infrastructure and the physician leadership because that's going to be what it takes to drive those and to pull those other areas, to develop the strategy, to align the compensation, to build the brand identity, to focus on quality, to develop culture. We're going to have the infrastructure and the physician leadership in place first. So our focus is comprehensive and not singular, but we do recognize that physician leadership is paramount, that we have to have them engaged and involved, that their leadership, their insight, their involvement is going to touch all of the other areas of the 8 key elements. So we put a premium on getting the physicians engaged and involved, and have done so with this particular network. And so far, while we're still in the early stages, they seem to be very, very excited, very engaged. It's exciting to meet with them and talk with them. They've got their committees together where they parson off areas of work, and they're starting to meet in those committees, in those smaller groups, and starting to tackle various issues from quality to IT to compensation. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time, and I think that they feel that they're truly partnering with administration and developing a path and a strategy for the future of the network and for the system as a whole. So going on, just to on the next couple of slides, just to kind of highlight with this particular group the areas that we've engaged the physicians, and we're getting them to help us. The Physician Governance or Advisory Council has been engaged to help us develop the strategy for the group. That's involved looking at data. We'll be looking at data with them, be talking with them about getting their perception on various areas that are going to affect the strategy, and so they're acutely involved with that development of the strategy. The group has come together as far as the culture, and they've developed the mission and value statement for the group. They're providing insight and advice into the creation of a newsletter that's going to be a tool to communicate across the employed network, communicate what the advisory council is doing, what other issues are coming down the pike that the group as a whole needs to be concerned and looking at. It's just going to be a way for them to communicate the culture, the beliefs, and the values of the system. Next, there's a quality committee that's beginning to convene and evaluate quality reporting, getting systems and things in place for the transition to a new EMR. The group has been involved in selecting the name, which is exciting. Not often do you get an opportunity to select the name for your group, but they were involved in selecting the name for the group and how it fits into the overall identity of the health system. Physicians have been involved in selecting the new EMR and practice management system, and as that transition takes place, they're going to be heavily involved again in the implementation. There's a finance committee of the Physician Governance Council that's been engaged in in developing the financial dashboards of the network overall and the practices individually, developing those dashboards that are going to be reviewed and looked at by the physicians and by the governance council. There will be a compensation committee that's going to be coming together, that's already met and talked about various issues, but is going to be in the future looking at how we begin to change the way as our reimbursement mechanisms change, and start to include more value and quality-based incentives from a reimbursement perspective. How do we then align our physicians with similar incentives? And so they'll be looking at how we change the compensation to reflect a new value-based environment. Finally, you know, as previously as talked about in all the other slides, you know, they were previously uninvolved and unengaged, but now, as you can see, significantly engaged in all the key areas led by the Physician Advisory Council. On the last slide here, just kind of shows the reporting structure, where the physicians fall, and how they work with the Physician Advisory Council, how that Physician Advisory Council fits into the overall organizational structure, and working with the subcommittees and the executive director, and with us as Healthcare Strategy Group is providing the management to the network. So this is just an example of what that org chart or that reporting structure would look like. So with that, I think that brings us to the end here. And Terry, I guess I'll turn it back over to you to finish this up.
Thanks, Neal. If I could just make one additional observation in the physician leadership aspect of the second case study. You know, in that organizational chart where you had the subcommittees under the governance council, or leadership council rather, that leadership council extended its reach and involved a number of other physicians in the practices through the subcommittee work. So all those subcommittees had anywhere from 3 to 5 physician members from the employee network, which again, you had more and more physicians involved in the direction of the organization. Has been really positive.
Yeah, good point, Terry. That's, you know, tentacles there that you know, kind of reaches out and involves more than just the select number there on the advisory council. Because when the advisory council was selected, there were more physicians that really wanted to be involved, and so it's a way for them to be involved, and also as a way to mentor younger physicians, to get them involved and kind of engaged in that leadership process as well.
All right. So looking at the time, we're just beyond 30 minutes. So maybe rather than directly addressing questions, we'll talk about the future in just a second. We do have another leadership series topic coming up in September, which is building market and industry knowledge. This is now getting into, you know, what type of educational endeavors are necessary as we develop physician leaders. And, you know, we've talked about identifying, developing, mentoring, and so it's part of the development process, building knowledge. And so we'll talk a little bit about this in September. With that, we'd like to thank you for participating in today's webinar. And we'd appreciate it if you will take a few moments to complete the evaluation form that will appear after you close the window. Your feedback is important to us. It informs future programming, but also helps us to improve. I apologize that we didn't get to questions, but as we promised before, any questions submitted we'll answer promptly via email. Plus, please feel free to contact us directly. Our contact information is in the handout. We'll be glad to talk to you about this topic or any other that you might like. Again, this webinar will be posted on the website by Monday, the 24th, for on-demand viewing. And finally, again, thank you, and we hope that you will join us for the next in our series. We hope you have a